Here's a story that's going completely ignored by the mainstream media, but is all over the place in Latin America. An Israeli man has been arrested for running a underage sex ring in Colombia, where women and girls who were disadvantaged, some of them even kidnapped, and brought into the sex trade to serve exclusively Israeli men that were taking vacations inside of Colombia. And this was only uncovered after it was connected to the part of an Israeli man, an Israeli citizen, Shea Azran, who had been murdered several years ago. Now, the murder was of Asi Ben Mush, an ex-IDF soldier who was known for his past involvement in drug smuggling and human trafficking in the early 2000s. As I said, he was a former member of the Israeli Defense Force, and he has been accused of killing the other Israeli citizen, but for some reason, he was never actually arrested for this criminal offense. Now, they determined that he was the owner of a hostel in Cartagena in Colombia. He was also one of the coordinators who put together, tourism packages that exclusively were sold to Israeli men visiting Colombia. And those men were granted access to underage girls who were essentially there against their will. According to a judicial resource cited by El Colombiano, the tourism packages were sold by Mush and his cohorts involved in taking Israeli men, most of them businessmen and men who recently ended their compulsory military service in the IDF, to parties at a variety of locales such as hostels, hotels, farms, and yachts, where the main attraction was the sexual exploitation of underage girls and mass consumption of narcotics and alcohol. The sites where exploitation occurred offered lodging or services exclusive for Israeli tourists, a practice that is surprisingly common in frequented tourist destinations throughout South America. Now, many people were not surprised by this whatsoever, and the investigators say that there is very probably a link between them and similar such human trafficking that is going on in other Latin American countries that are run by former IDF individuals. Now, there are 14 people involved, and 16 people, there's been 16 arrest warrants put out, but only 14 people have been arrested thus far, one of them being a Colombian police officer. Now, I don't really think I have to tell my audience the history of the inhumanities of the Zionist state of Israel, and part of what makes Zionism what it is, and one of the things that makes it do what it does, is the perception that other people are lesser human beings. Now, I'm not quoting the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, because it's not real. That's a complete fabrication. But what we can look to is the very real essence of Israel as it exists today. And that is, the Jews are the chosen people, except for the black ones, and most of the brown ones. Pretty much just the white Ashkenazi ones. But this is reflected very heavily in the laws that they pass, which are very discriminatory, not just to the Palestinians, whom they abuse constantly, but also the other people who are also Jewish that come in from other countries that aren't the right color, according to them. There has always been this perception by the Zionist state, which doesn't represent Judaism at all. This is an extremist fundamentalist version that pollutes the original meaning of what it is that Judaism is, just as Daesh doesn't represent Islam, the KKK does not represent Christianity, etc. But this has always been Israel's kind of thing, the belief that other people are... I'm trying to put this in a way that YouTube won't get mad at. But I think you get what I mean when they refer to people of other faiths and other races. So it's not surprising that this would happen, given the way that they treat Palestinians and the way a lot of the very high-ranking rabbis in the country refer to people outside of the Jewish race, even though Judaism is a religion, not a race. So we can see, since the IDF carries out routine, terrible human rights abuses against Palestinians because of a self-perceived right to be superior to other people, and that's extended into their lives. It's a very core tenet of Israeli society, the belief in one's own superiority. This is not at all unlike the American exceptionalism. Israel believes it on a racial level, that they are inherently superior to other people because they are genetically Israeli. Now, this is very similar to how a lot of Americans feel, that they are superior to other people because of some kind of virtue that the American people have, something about, like the really lofty, very, very capitalist notions of we build our own selves up from nothing and we have come to dominate the world because we are inherently superior. A kind of circular reasoning kind of thing. So long as you forget that whole genocide of natives and, that whole slavery thing. So is it really that surprising that we would find this reflected in many Israelis, particularly those who served in the military, that are most highly indoctrinated into this mentality of superiority, being reflected in their actions in other countries? If even another Jewish person who is the wrong color is considered to be a lesser person, then imagine how they feel about a person of color who isn't even Jewish. And this is perfectly reflected in their actions in holding these girls. Let's call girls. When you're underage, you're a girl. Holding them for sexual slavery, taking advantage of many of them because they're poor and they have no other way to make ends meet. And some of them weren't even there by their own will. They didn't even choose to be there. It wasn't even economic coercion. It was physically abduction and forcing them to be there. And to know that these Israeli men used these women knowing that's why they were there speaks very much to the kind of people these tourists are. I'm not painting all Israelis with this brush, but I am painting the men who were using these women. Now let's not forget the exclusivity here. This was sold entirely to to Israeli tourists, which means they were in on it. This is part of their perceived superiority. They all kind of understand that's how they think and that's how things are. I mean, this wasn't offered to people who weren't from Israel. I mean, you would think with the profit motive alone, you would offer this to as many people as possible in order to make the most money, but it's sort of an understood thing in much of the Israeli society that the other people are considered lesser. And of course, that's wrong. And that these, quote-unquote lesser people deserve to be used for the satisfaction and the pleasure of Israeli tourists. So you take that kind of male rapist mentality, the perceived right to take sex from a woman, and combine that with this racially motivated nonsense perception of superiority, and you combine the two, and you've got one hell of a horrible human being on your hands. Now think about that when you're thinking about what these women went through. What kind of inhumanities, what kind of dehumanizing actions they must have suffered as a result of this. And what's important here is the fact that this came from the very mentality, the very foundation of Israeli society. But again, that's one of those things that you're not allowed to criticize, because if you do, you're considered anti-Semitic.
Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.